Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our host and our guest for today. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. And as I always start out, please continue on this healing journey with us. Each episode is going to bring you a little bit of a different perspective. And if you need to push pause, do good self-care, take a breath of fresh air, go for a walk, eat a bunch of chocolate, whatever you need to do to, just take a moment for yourself if anything becomes a little bit difficult as you listen to our episode today. And our guest is so interesting. I read her bio, and Tina has done some really incredible work, I think, around, I would say, overall the topic of shame as it relates to intimacy. But let me tell you a few things about Dr. Tina Schirmer-Sellers. Is a licensed sex and gender feminist psychotherapist, a best-selling author, a researcher, a maritime professor, and a media personality. Her expertise spans through sex therapy, spiritual intimacy, parenting, medicine, and social justice. She has two interesting, fabulous books. One is called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy. And her second, more recent book is called Shameless Parenting, Everything You Need to Do to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too. So welcome, Tina. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Katie. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always like to have our guests talk a little bit about where they grew up and, what it was like. Did you do college? Did you do high school? Did you play sports? Just a little bit about, how it was for you as a young person.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and had my grandparents and great aunts and uncles and parents obviously close at hand. I grew up in a Swedish immigrant home, and so there were a lot of loving Swedes around me. That actually ended up having a lot to do with my career later on, kind of in a surprising kind of way, and I can talk about that later. I grew up a competitive figure skater and did that most of my childhood and young adult, I guess mostly childhood and early adolescence. And then I ended up leaving skating, a little bit of a tragic story, but ended up having kind of a more typical high school, which was, I think, really ended up serving me well. Went on to college, was a junior high educator, junior high and high school teacher for several years. And then it was really watching how my kids were struggling to learn based on what they were dealing with at home that took me back to get my master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And then I went on to study medical family therapy and clinical sexology and got my PhD in clinical sexology. And,
wow.
And that really had a lot to do with discovering how much shame I started teaching in a graduate marriage and family therapy program shortly after I got my master's. And I taught the human sexuality course, which was a required course for licensure as a therapist. And it was there that I could really see how so many of my students had grown up in silent and shaming homes, and the way they felt about themselves and their body and sexuality, and the very the amount of ignorance, like how very little they understood about what was typical developmental curiosity, was really stunning to me. And I think this was where I sort of got surprised by my own upbringing, because I grew up in a home where we talked about sexuality like you talk about recipes. Just talked about
wow.
all the time, whatever. Pardon me?
With both parents, everybody in your household was comfortable with the topic?
Everybody. Yep. It was epigenetic. Like people had been talking about that bodies and sexuality were a normal part of the human condition for generations. And so everybody was so comfortable with it that you would have thought, from an American perspective, you'd have thought we were talking about health and wellness, or talking about, like how to brush your teeth, or, what are you going to wear when you go out to play? It was just such a normal part of conversations and very appropriate. And so sometimes it was joking, sometimes it was serious, whatever, but it didn't have any of that uncomfortable stuff that I found later in life. And so because that's what was norm for me, when I started to see how much people had gotten hurt by, the sharp right turn we took in 1980 as a country, the religious right and moral majority and the purity culture and abstinence only education and the billions of dollars we put into that really shaped an entire generation and now generations of people who were really struggling to see themselves as worthy and valuable and give love and receive love, and just so much humiliation and disgust about themselves. And I was heartbroken by it because I thought no one was ever meant to feel this way, be treated this way. And so it became my thing to study it and speak about it and write about it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, those movements that are very strict around sexuality and, what's appropriate, what's not, and marriage, and I know you must have stumbled through, sexual violence in that realm and what it looks like or, feels like. I think, your main theme is this idea of shame. And I can only imagine you must have explored how the intersection of sexual violence is shameful in and of itself, but extra shame in the context of an entire culture or peer group or faith group that really condemns any outside of wedlock kinds of interactions.
Right. And really, find?
Yeah. What sort of things you learn?
Go ahead.
No, you go. That's fine.
Really, it's kind of a combination of things. If you take a child and everything they do naturally, like they find their genitals at 11 months old, or, they ask the question, what is sex? Or they are curious about what their cousin who's the same age as them, what their bodies look like, and, whatever, the natural curiosities that kids have. If they grow up in a home that's silent and shaming around sexuality, then most of the time, every single one of those natural discoveries and evolutions that emerge, someone is there to yell at them or slap their hand away or tell them it's gross or dirty. And if it's a religious home, that God doesn't like it, right? And the only meaning they can make from that is that something must be profoundly wrong with me because I'm just being human. So that no one is providing them the education. What they are telling them is that they're not okay. So now a child is especially open to being exploited. And so there isn't appropriate supervision going on. Somebody who's older, who has more power, is bigger, whatever, imposes their sexual curiosity onto this child or onto an adolescent. It can happen at various ages along the way, but their own innocence is then taken at that point, and it is then what is inputted upon them is this idea that your sexuality doesn't even belong to you. It belongs to somebody else who gets to do whatever they want to. And then because it's a silent topic, or it's a topic that you're not supposed to, you've gotten the message you're not supposed to do, you're not supposed to think about, you're not supposed to want, whatever. You begin to think like it's you. This is me. I'm the bad person here, right? Which, of course, none of that is true at all. Children only have so much power. They only have as much as they were granted for that age, right? And so people that are their size and their age and younger, not older, right?
Hi, this is Katie Koestner, and I wanted to remind all of our listeners about the free National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline. We at Take Back the Night have assembled an incredible team of attorneys, trauma-informed, who truly believe survivors and want to support their journeys in healing and finding justice. The Get Justice Hotline is 567-SHATTER, or feel free to fill out a form on the Take Back the Night website, share your story, let the attorneys know what's going on, and they will get back to you as soon as possible with all of your legal options. That is a service we are delighted to provide through Take Back the Night.
But when you're left alone to make sense of it by yourself, really the only thing you can think is that it must be you. And that's actually almost the easiest, if you will, thing to think. Because if you were to think that people who love you have hurt you, that would jeopardize your survival. So to think that you're bad is actually a defense mechanism, but it ends up hurting so much on your inside. Sexual shame attacks your very self-worth and your belief that you are worthy of not just love and belonging, but desire, pleasure, care, connection, being seen, known, loved, and accepted, very core to the human experience.
How does, I'm curious, how is there a difference between sexual shame out of just normal, consensual, chosen behavior that might feel like embarrassing and awful, or have you noticed, like in your work, the additional healing necessary when it's non-consensual trauma? What sort of differences for our listeners? Some may not have been survivors, or they might be helping somebody else, but they also might really resonate with what you're talking about, which is this overall dislike of sexuality, intimacy, or not dislike, but like embarrassment overall about it. I would even, and this is kind of a separate point, I would ask secondly is, the body shaming, or especially for women, where they don't even like the skin they're in and the impossible standards that are set for us and our bodies. So maybe we could talk about the differences in healing and, some of the modalities you have talked about or written about. And are they any different for those dealing with the additional shame from sexual abuse as well? Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that you're kind of getting at there is when power is involved. So I don't have equal power with the people that I'm with. Someone has power over me. There's an additional kind of trauma that happens there because of the helplessness in that situation. That person has more power and they're manipulating and they're taking, basically. And so there's a trauma around, I didn't have choice here. I couldn't stop it. Maybe I should have been able to, they sort of should on themselves all over the place, but they couldn't, and they may not even know how much they couldn't, but, that person had much more ability to usurp their power over and do whatever. And so that element is an element that has to be healed. But we can also have shame just from, like sexual exploration of 7-year-olds, same age. They were both into it. They thought it was really fun. They were curious. They giggled and laughed their way through it. But now maybe at 16 or 17 or 18, they hear about things like called, sexual abuse, and they think I abused my friend, or my friend abused me, because again, they've lacked any education along the way. Nobody was helping them understand anything about sexuality and bodies and the culture and all the things that actually we really need to understand. So there can be layers to our healing that have to do with the conditions by which we were hurt. So you have certain conditions where you have a parent or a caregiver that's shaming a child's natural development. And there's power, obviously, in that situation, but that's going to be its own kind of healing and education that they need to do around that. But then there's other kinds that happen too. And oftentimes we are having to heal from different layers of ways in which we've been hurt around sexuality. One of the things that you were talking about is like what the culture does. We have a culture that drives its economy based on people feeling badly about themselves.
Right. I say that too, Tina, actually. I do a workshop where I talk about our culture sells us a very small box and makes us buy things to try and stay in that box.
That's right.
Yeah, whether it be the clothes, the makeup, the weight loss stuff. Try to buy more stuff, get back in the box.
Right.
It's like feels never ending and exhausting.
Yeah,
I think
it is exhausting. It is exhausting. I'd love to read to you a definition of sexual shame. We just actually got it in research only about 7 years ago. We had no research on sexual shame. We had shame from like Brene Brown and others, but we had nothing on sexual shame. And so this brilliant PhD student did research on sexual shame, and she interviewed a group of people, and only a small number of them described having come from religious homes, but all of these people had been influenced, went through their adolescence. I think the vast majority of them went through their adolescence after 1990. So after we had abstinence-only education, that was really religious education across the United States, 80% medically inaccurate. They, from these interviews, from sort of doing data crunching on these interviews, came out with an incredible definition of what sexual shame is. And I would love to read it to you because I think for many of your readers, they'll identify, because they could be saying, well, do I have sexual shame? I don't know. But let me read this to you. Sexual shame is a visceral feeling, which means it's in your body. You feel it in your body. You feel, it's inside, a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. This definition can be internalized, so it often begins between a child and a caregiver, but then it becomes an internalized thought. So this feeling can be internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships, having a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. So those are really all the primary areas where we do our bonding, where we do our deep attachment, right? Trust, communication, physical and emotional intimacy. Sexual shame develops across the lifespan, like I've been talking about. So it often starts really young as kids are just curious about pleasure and, their bodies and the world, in interactions with interpersonal relationships. So often caregivers, parents, and others. But then one's culture and society begins to play a role, right? As we were talking about. And then that creates a subsequent critical self-appraisal. So the inner critic then gets going. And then that torments us for the rest of our lives unless we do work around that to heal, right? We just hear how we're not enough, not enough, not enough, not enough, right? There is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions, including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment toward one's own sexual desire. So what that's really saying, there was a wonderful book by Peggy Ornstein a few years back called Girls and Sex. She later wrote one called Boys and Sex, and it's about the impact of media on kids, on young adults, adolescents and young adults.
Hi, everybody. It's Katie Koestner. Just a quick interruption. We want you to know that there is an entire shop full of cool merch on the Take Back the Night website to support your own healing journey, that of someone you care about. There are t-shirts, there's bracelets, there's glow-in-the-dark stuff. There's all kinds of unique special edition from our artist series as well. So please take a look if it's a holiday or a special occasion or just a gift to yourself. Support Take Back the Night through your purchase.
And what she found when she was working with the girls was that they were 15 to 22 years old, about 80 of them, is that they would describe themselves as competent and confident in so many areas of their life until they got ready to go out. And then they were putting down 3, 4, and 5 shots of hard liquor, because they didn't know if they had the right to keep themselves safe or if they could. And again, these were not kids raised in religious homes, but sexual shame and rape culture is so rampant across the United States, in part because we've made sex dangerous. We've not provided sex education. We've only provided religious education that just told them don't, and it's dangerous and you're going to ruin your life. While we removed our regulations in the 80s from media and from the banks and basically said, you can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want as long as you're making money for your stockholders, for corporations. Mm-hmm. And so media has been on a free-for-all since the mid-80s, providing all kinds of erotic entertainment that isn't accurate. And yet that's the only sex education we're providing as a country, right? And so you've got people feeling incredibly confused and incredibly ashamed about who they are, and it's deeply affecting their abilities to give and receive love, to really bond in loving relationships. There's a deep belief, if I think, I'm awful and disgusting, then I'm going to put on a mask. And then when you fall in love with me, you're really falling in love, I believe, with my mask. And I think to myself, if I ever showed you who I really was, there's no way you would love me, because that's how I feel about myself. So now relationships have a wall between them because they're not able to bring their true, authentic self to each other because they don't believe they're good enough, that they deserve it.
Is there a difference between this experience of shame, sexual shame, between men and women, Tina?
Well, they get different messages, right, from culture, from patriarchal culture. So men are often getting a message, sexuality is normal for you, desire is normal for you. Your desire might be so great you can't quite control yourself, so women are going to need to help you control yourself. And again, it's very heteronormative, right, in the messages. And women are getting the message that it's all about men and not about them, that men are dangerous in their sexuality, but they need to be able to accommodate men, because if you don't accommodate men, they're going to cheat, or they're going to do this, or they're going to do that. And so women have often a lot of fear around their sexuality, a fear of their own, a fear of someone else's, and they're on guard. That's hard for them to feel safe, because even the messages themselves have made them feel unsafe in the world. I remember one time I was just sort of asking the question in groups that I was talking to, how old were you the first time as a young woman, first time somebody whistled at you or made some kind of sexual advance? And a lot of people were 8, 9, 10 years old, right? Had no idea what was happening, but that was incredibly scary, right? And so...
Did they find it scary, or did any of them say they found it like they were so lucky that they got seen as sexy at age 8?
Yeah, well, it's usually it can be a combination of things. They can like the attention, but there's something about it that feels scary, because often these people are much, much older than they are, and they're not really sure what it is that they are whistling at or saying. They don't really understand. So it feels big and scary, but it can also feel, like it's a kind of attention. And a lot of times that depends on how much appropriate attention a child's getting in their life. you know.
Right.
Yeah. When we talk about healing from sexual trauma, you can see just from this bit that we have talked about so far that there are layers, and it really, we're often needing to heal from exactly what happened to us, our particular story. So in the book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, I talk about how you heal sexual shame. And I talk about healing the mess, the model for erasing sexual shame. And there's 4 kind of areas that we will work on over and over again to kind of unravel this ball of shame that we are dealing with. And it's frame, name, claim, and aim. Frame is get yourself a frame or a scaffolding of sex education. And that's really what the second book does, even though it's geared towards parents. Shameless Parenting literally walks you through what were the conversations you should have gotten at 2. And what were the ways you should have been treated? And what were the kinds of curiosities that were emerging? And what about 2 to 4? And what about 4 to 6? And what about 6 to 8? All the way up to 18. And in there, I say, here's what most children are curious about. Here's what their emotional tasks are for their development. Here's the behavioral things that'll emerge often during these times. Here's where their body and sexuality and other kind of curiosity is. And then I ask questions. How might it be for you if you saw a kid do this? Or how do you think the adults in your life treated you when you were expressing these interests or whatever? And then if they can feel inside of them a place where they're like, like, oh gosh, I really don't think I got what I needed. Then I've listed on there the top books for kids at that age, the top books for parents, and you literally can go to the library and get those books and read them to that 2-year-old within you or that 4-year-old or 8-year-old within you and really heal, because you need to give yourself that sex education, what's true, and you need to nurture the part of you that was made bad for something that's part of being human.
Yeah, I like that what you just painted for all of our listeners is, I think it might be really interesting to go back and explore your childhood from, what you should have had.
Yeah.
And you can almost see, I'm almost envisioning you might have written this in the book, like finding pictures of yourself when you were 2.
Yeah.
And putting it right by the book while you're reading it. And
I love that.
Yeah, just kind of visualizing you kind of putting your current and your past self together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the book is, it's like 8.5 by 11. It's a kind of a workbook size, and it's filled with pictures of children and adolescents at the different ages all the way through the book. And I've even hidden in there a couple of pictures of like my granddaughters when they were little in there. Yeah. But I love the idea that you just brought up. Go find pictures of yourself because you were little. You were little. And I mean, even at 18, you are young. You don't feel young because you're as old as you've ever been, but you are. And as soon as you get any years beyond that, you go like, oh, I was young. There was a lot I didn't know yet, but man, kids are put in all kinds of positions to manage all kinds of situations that are so far over their heads. And because they didn't get the education to know what is normal, what isn't, they're really prone to being exploited. And a lot of kids are exploited in junior high and high school and college because they don't know when somebody's being exploitive or manipulative, right? Nobody sort of helped them be like, this is what it would be like if somebody's treating you with respect and kindness. It's going to go like this. It's not going to go like this.
Tina, what you're doing is so brilliant. And, the work I do, I'll go and speak and talk to students and parents as well, like you do. Not too long ago, I was speaking at an all-girls school, and they had trained all their teachers and coaches, all the adults, about boundaries, like appropriate boundaries. And I went in and I trained the students. And I was really happy because at least it should have been middle school too, but it was just 9th through 12th graders, 14 to 18. But I think it's like reverse sex ed. I was trying to say, if a teacher all the grooming or all the things that we've been talking about, like if this is what's going on, red flags come up that this is someone who is exploiting you.
Right.
And I think it's one thing is sex education, but then also it's like not just the body parts and how they work and that they're not embarrassing. It's also like who has access and under what circumstances. And so it sounds like awesome. How much do you cover those kinds of things?
All the way through. Yeah. All the way through. Because when I think of sex education, I don't think of just bodies. I think of what's the relational intelligence you need to have? What's the emotional intelligence you need to have? The social intelligence that you need to have, and the sexual, so the body kind of stuff. All of those things are at work, at play when you're growing up, right? And so you're teaching 3-year-olds about body autonomy. Who owns your body? Who gets to touch your body? Who doesn't get to touch your body? Is it okay if you don't want to hug somebody? Can you say you don't want to hug somebody? This body belongs to you, body autonomy, and their body belongs to them, right? And we listen and respect their boundaries too. You're teaching all about difference in families, difference in people, racial differences, and how we celebrate diversity and difference. As a people and as a culture, you're teaching all sorts of things that are social, emotional learning, really in your kindergarten to 8 years old. A lot of it's social, emotional learning. And then it gets into the more specific kinds of stuff. But again, you're talking about power and power difference and how power can be abused. You're teaching in media literacy. How do you discern when something is entertainment or something is true? Right? You teach on these things.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to take the journey on the Dear Survivor podcast. A quick note, we are 100% volunteer at the podcast and at Take Back the Night. Your donations, your generosity helps us do what we do on such a shoestring budget. And we would be so grateful if this show is helping you through your journey and you are passing it along to others you care about. Please visit the Take Back the Night website and donate and support our cause and our mission to end sexual violence and support survivors. Thank you.
So in the book at different ages and stages, like I teach parents and people, this is what it means to examine and do media literacy. This is what it is to prepare a child for seeing pornography. And how you help them, again, know what it is and who they can safely talk to and ask questions of and all those kinds of things. So it's very much, and it's really modeled after what I got, in a Swedish home. Most of the Northern European countries, Holland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, they have comprehensive sex education that they call life education, because it isn't just about sexuality, it's about relationships and life, and begins in kindergarten and runs all the way through 18. And so this is very much how that book is put together, because we're trying to learn all of those things. How to have voice, how to stand up for ourselves, how to protect each other, all those things is part of what we're learning and needing to learn when we're growing up. And it's something we fail to teach. We failed to teach these things by and large in the United States. We still only have 18 states in the United States that are required by the laws they've passed in those states to have medically accurate sex education.
Oh my goodness. Tina, that's so shocking. That's just crazy sounding.
It is. It's one of the most protective things we can do for kids, as well as really sets them on the path for having good relationships, picking good people, picking good friends, picking good partners, knowing what they like, what they don't like, having voice, all those things that help people build rich relationships, which is the most paramount things to our happiness. There's a study in Harvard right now, an 85-year study on happiness, and it always comes down to relationships.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think even longevity is doing the same thing. Like those who have healthy relationships and strong interpersonal connections live longer. So my goodness, it's like full circle.
Yep.
Full circle from 2 to 102.
Yeah, and I think when you separate out sex as if it's something else, it's like a specialized medicine or it's an other thing. We forget that as humans, we are bio, we have bodies, psycho, we have emotions, social, we have relationships, and we have a sexuality. And our sexuality is the parts of us that desire connection and pleasure as a human with myself and with others. That's what sexuality is. And we're also spiritual, however you make sense of that. Things that are deeply meaningful and existential to us, we struggle to make sense of for ourselves, right? And that's the human condition. Every human has those elements of themselves. And we ought to really be teaching, equipping, if you will, kids and adolescents and young adults to really grow those parts in the ways that feel nourishing to them.
Awesome. Awesome, Tina. What a positive conversation we've had. And I think it gives me a lot of hope because what you're talking about is a brand new way we've not done on the show to think about healing. It's really beautiful because I think it also, when you get really stuck, what I'm liking about what you said, when, sometimes you're in therapy or you get really stuck and you're like, I can't move past where I am in my healing. And I think sometimes trying something as unique as going back to relearning or for the first time learning about all this intimacy is really eye-opening. I think it really helped a lot of our listeners. And I like that you described the second book as more of a workbook because a lot of times we'll do recommend journaling and diagrams and to-do lists. But this is definitely a different kind of, modality. And definitely, I like when you can look at something. That's why I mentioned the photograph of yourself. So you could care for yourself too. If you can care for your little self as a big self.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I really like it. So just tell our listeners a little bit more about the kinds of things you're doing besides the books. What else?
Well, I about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, I went back to school to study psychedelic assisted therapy because I'm very interested in what the research has been saying about the very specific use or careful use of psychedelics in healing trauma, especially sexual trauma and other forms of PTSD. And because of my interest in sexual shame and because I have seen how powerfully impactful it can be in some people's lives that really interrupts their ability to do relationships in any meaningful way for them, especially close, intimate relationships. I thought, boy, if we can help with providing psychedelic assisted therapy for some people, that might really help catapult their healing journey so they can spend more of their life living the liberated, loving life they want to live, as opposed to feeling so weighted down by trauma and pain and shame. So I've been kind of in that world a bit lately, and I have a retreat center in Oregon, and I have a organization called Inanna Rising, INANNARISING.org, that supports physicians and therapists that have gone on to get training in psychedelics. And because we're going to struggle with that as far as the legalization stuff goes over the next at least 10 years. And so I just want to support those people that are doing it carefully and ethically and really trying to be a healing force in the world. So that's my latest endeavors.
I love it. And, you've lived a good life so far. And, it's really exciting to hear that you keep energizing all the work you're doing and going out and seeking more ideas and learning. I can tell you're a love of lifelong learner.
Yep.
And that I think and you definitely, I'm so glad you grew up with that Swedish background because it is, I think they just did a study on happiness and Sweden might have gotten the happiest country in the world. I'm pretty sure.
Well, one of them over there, because I know Iceland's up there a lot of times too. So maybe it's probably one of them. Yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah.
That, Yeah, I mean, just like ridiculous trivia. I
Mm-hmm.
think I forget on one of the Bachelor dating shows they went and did like naked plunge pooling or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yeah, sure.
um, yeah, it just is so. It looks so liberating and
Yeah,
freeing when you're not so stressed out about like all
right.
this stuff that's being sold to us. So
Right,
I'm
exactly.
delighted that you could join us on the show.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. It's
we
been fun to
definitely,
be here.
yeah, we'll definitely let our listeners know in the notes where to find your book. I'm sure it's where books are sold.
Yeah,
And
both
maybe we can
books. Yep.
yep, put in something about some of the other things you're doing and a link to your website. So
Yeah, and they can
anything
also
else?
welcome to follow me on Instagram. I'm at Dr.
Perfect.
Tina Shameless. And if they are
Nice.
curious about just what's happening with Inanna Rising, it is a pretty new Instagram, and it's Inanna, INANNA underscore rising, RISING underscore PAT for psychedelic assisted therapy. So we've got a little bit there, but yeah, just they can reach out, they can DM me. And if any of your listeners can't afford either of the books, but really want to read them, they're welcome to DM me and I can send them a code for a free audio version of the book. So at least they could listen to it. So I'm happy to do that for people because I don't
That's
want
so
people
generous.
to not get the book, want to do the work. Bless your heart if you want to
Yeah.
do the work. If you can't afford it, I'm happy to help.
Well, thank you for your generosity, Tina, as well. And my goodness, I can't wait to continue to follow you and have our
Thank you.
listeners, find out what you're doing next. I'm sure it'll be magnificent. And perhaps once you get a little farther along with the latest project, you can come back and talk about that too. So thank
Wonderful.
you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me, Katie.
absolutely. And for our listeners, again, just please do that excellent self care. Please note that the takebackthenight.org website has tons of resources, including links to the podcast and all the episodes. Many of the books mentioned will be accessible there. And then, of course, I always like to mention our legal support hotline. If all of a sudden you're ready, you like do all this work, and I'm ready to go and find some justice as part of your healing process, please don't hesitate to use the Justice Hotline. So thank you and keep following along with the podcast. Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.